Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your pauper commentators, Michael Pitchick and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
You know, Mike, it's going pretty good. How about yourself?
I really can't complain. We've got a new set on the horizon. I'm about to go on a work trip. I will have gone on a work trip once this episode goes up, but you know,
Apple picking.
Oh, the apple picking's a separate thing. We're going to an island in the Boston Harbor for a couple days. It's going to be fun. But that stuff aside, let's take care of the upkeep because we've got a lot to get through this week. So first off, as every week, we are brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a great online store with all sorts of art from throughout Magic's history, as well as the history of art at large. And they make all sorts of dice bags, playmats, tokens, and art prints with this content on it. And we are an affiliate there. So you can either go to originalmagicart.store/commentary, spelled as is in the name of this podcast, or you can use the affiliate code commentary in all caps to let them know that we sent you over there. And that should get you a 10% discount on your order. And we get a little bit of a kickback. So not only are you helping yourself out by getting some cheaper, really, really cool magic stuff, but you're also helping keep the show around. Adrian, what do you have for us?
Well, we've got a Patreon for just $1 or so, an episode. Wow. You, too, can hear the full show, including the pre- and post shows, as well as getting access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel, where it's always a real common time. PM.
All right.
Yeah. Let me tell you about my GP weekend.
Yeah, I do want to hear about this. You went to Richmond.
Yes. A lot of great stuff. Got to go with a great group of guys, legacy players from the local scene. The one and only Aaron Rubin, of course, but I did make some new friends along the way. Some big highlights. I got to meet Alex Ullman and the Maverick Girl, and I got to hang out with them, and I got them both to sign my playmat. So, Mike, I'm coming for you next. Pauper content creator playmat signatures.
Yeah, there aren't that many of us. You can get there.
Yeah, I can get there. So that was pretty sweet. I had a great time. I got to, before I get to the magic part, I'll tell you about all the other cool stuff I did. I got to go to Guar Bar. That was a lot of fun. I had a seitan sandwich. For those of you who don't know me, I'm actually a vegetarian, but I got it with an egg, and it was really, really good. Like, great food. We went to like a Korean barbecue place, and I got like a tofu bibimbap. So I ate really, really well over the weekend. It did make me miss my girlfriend's cooking, though, which is kind of weird. But yeah, Guar Bar was great. I got a koozie. So as for the actual magic, Thursday, we got in like very late on Wednesday or early Thursday morning. It was around midnight. Thursday, I played in a grinder, and I did really well. I 4-0'd the grinder, and I secured 2 buys in the main event. So I felt pretty good about myself. I thought, wow, this might be the time I finally day 2 at GP. That did not happen. I went 5-3 in day 1. You need to 6-2 better to advance. I credit my losses. Some of them were good, drawn-out games where I just got like outground in the case of my second loss, my Miracles opponent. But I played against Merfolk in my 3rd round, so coming off of my buys. And sorry, did you say something?
No.
Oh, coming off of my 3rd buys, my 2 buys in the 3rd round, I lost to Merfolk, and I just don't think I should have lost that matchup. But I made some poor sideboarding decisions, so that kind of stung. And then what killed me was I played against Elves. And for those of you who don't play Legacy, I'm going to really try and describe this hand to you. We went to game 3, and on the play, I kept like Eye of Ugin, Eldrazi Temple, some random stuff, and then 2 Ratchet Bombs. And I never drew another land for the Ratchet Bomb, which would have killed all their elves. And then the turn right before they went off, I thought not seared them, so I can take a card from their hand, and they revealed 2 natural orders. So that game just did not go my way. But I had a great time. I played in the Pauper Challenge with the Maverick Girl and actually Jer James, who ended up winning on Is It Delver, and I did very, very poorly. I was on Boros Monarch. There were actually a couple of folks on Boros Monarch. Shout out to Matt, who I did meet at the tournament. He said, "Your voice sounds awfully familiar," and I said, "Oh, I'm Adrian from Color Commentary," and he said, "That's why." So shout out to you. Thanks for saying hey. I did very poorly in the Pauper tournament. There were no Boros decks in the top 8, you might notice, but there were easily 4 or 5 Boros players, if not more, in that tournament. So I don't know if it was the field or what. I played against Boggles twice, got ranched, lost to a pretty big misplay, honestly. My opponent had out a Slippery Boggle with Ethereal Armor on it, and I had out an untapped Crew Land for Electricity Overload and a Cart Clan Shaman and one artifact out. They went to attach Armadillo Cloak, and in response, I overload Electric Reed and sacrificed my land, and I had missed that they had played an enchantment on their other land. So that was pretty upsetting because I played around like, I feel like that game was mine to lose. I had a Ray of Revelation in hand also, so I could have easily stalled another turn. But I think Boggles is a pretty bad matchup for Boros. You basically have to mulligan until you get Standard Bearer just because their deck is so much faster.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a bummer, but I'm glad that you got out there and had like a chance to have fun at one of these events, because the GP pauper scene is definitely fun.
And I'm not done. The next day, I got to redeem myself. I played in what's called a double up tournament. Basically, it's for double the prizes. So I won, like, between my grinder, I won 300 tickets. At this event, I won like 400 tickets. So 700 tickets, it's a lot of tickets. I spent some of it on 2 foil Sorcerer Spyglasses, and the rest I spent on basic land packs, which were 50 tickets a pop. I ended up getting like 9, and then the lands inside are the GP promo basics, and they're going for like $5 to $7 depending on where you get them from. So I think that was clearly the highest EV of the weekend, was to grab those.
I've got one of those lands from when I was actually at the GP, and like those are a very nice series of lands.
Dude, I have so many now.
Yeah, well, now you can make everything foily and nice, just the way you like it.
I've actually kept them in the packs because I'm planning on trading them for other cards. But yeah.
Oh, well, whatever floats your boat, right?
Other big pauper news, not that we're much of a finance podcast, but I got my foil Diabolic Edicts, my promos, forever ago, and they were like 30 each. They're now like $90, so that's pretty cool. And then foil snuff outs also very expensive now as well, and it's because of the rise of blue-black, Death Shadow, and Legacy. Both of those cards see very heavy play in Legacy right now.
That definitely tracks for me. That deck's been putting up numbers, had a lot of press given to it over the last Pro Tour, so it makes sense.
Aaron played against it 5 times in the Swiss.
5 times, wow! That's
and he also, shout out to him. He made 16th place.
Oh, nice. It's always fun when our friends do well.
Yeah, Aaron's been really tearing it up at GPs and SCGs to a lesser extent, but he's actually a bronze level pro now. We give him so much crap for it all the time. But yeah, he's a bronze level pro now, and he's going to the Pro Tour, and this is what he wants to do, so he's really put in the work effort. So if you see the name Aaron Rubin in the future, that's my friend.
Yeah, it's really awesome that you got to have this experience, and I'm glad, even if you didn't put up the results you might have liked to, at least you got out there and you had some fun, right?
Well, Mike, I'm a spike, so that actually is not what matters. What matters is definitely the quantity of wins. But I see your point. I had a great time, and I would run it back. Same weekend, I would run it back.
To be fair, you did also get a couple of wins in there, so it's not all for naught, right?
Yeah, I'm playing Eldrazi so much, it's actually made me realize why people like blue. Like, if I have a bad hand, I just have a bad hand.
Yeah, I mean, it is a stompy deck in that regard, right? Like, you're not gonna draw that many more cards.
And my stompy deck is more powerful than the pauper stompy deck, by a long shot. I have a lot more disruptive elements. I have bigger threats, uncounterable threats. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's like, did I draw what I needed or did I not draw what I needed? So, but I think the power level of that deck is absurd.
Yeah, I mean, it is a force within that format. So I don't know. Sometimes things just don't break right. And
an Eldrazi player did top 8, so that made me feel good because if sort of Affinity's in a very bad spot right now, but while I was playing it, it doesn't place a whole big lot, and so I started thinking, did I really pick the right deck if this deck can't place? You know what I mean? So,
all right, so you had a great weekend.
Yeah.
Got to go out, be with the people.
The common folk.
The common folk. There you go. Wonderful turn of phrase. So now that you're back, we've started to see stuff from, God, what is this set actually called? I keep wanting to recall.
I think it's called Guilds of Ravnica.
Guilds of Ravnica. I keep wanting to call it Return to Ravnica or Return to Ravnica 3 Tokyo Drift or some stupid name because I can just never
Return to
remember what it's
Ravnica 2
called.
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. So we're going back to Ravnica, and we're not going to get into like individual spoilers, especially because we are recording this on a Tuesday, and there's going to be 3 more days of spoilers between now and the time you folks are listening to this in the general public. So we're not going to go into specific spoilers of cards, but I did want to talk about the mechanics that we're seeing in this set. So first off, we're seeing a returning mechanic, the only returning mechanic, I believe, in Convoke. And Convoke is an ability that lets you tap your creatures and to cast the spell, and for each creature you tap, it either pays for a generic mana or it pays for a mana of that creature's color. Adrian, what are your thoughts on this ability and what we might potentially see in Pauper as a result of it?
Sorry, I was looking at something else. Which one are we talking about? I have opinions about all of them.
Convoke.
Okay, Convoke is a great spell. Ability. That's right. You said that's the only one returning. You are correct. It is the only one returning. Convoke's a good ability. We don't really see it a lot in the format. The biggest example I can think of is possibly Triplicate Spirits.
Sprout Swarm does have it.
Oh, you know what? It does. Sprout Swarm also has buyback though, so I wonder if that's also part. I wonder if that's the bigger ability there. But yeah, I don't know. It would take a lot, I think, for Convoke to really break this format. I'd be very interested to see if there are any mono white Convoke cards, because that could fit into the tokens deck very easily. So that's really what I would be on the lookout for in Convoke from this set.
Yeah, so that's in Selesnya, so that's white-green. So I could also potentially see, I don't know, like some medium-costed green big thing that might find a home somewhere. But historically, this has been a mechanic that's very good for limited, but has had slight troubles kind of sticking in Pauper. There's a bunch of Convoke cards we have access to, and not that many of them actually see play. Mm-hmm. Next up on our mechanics is Jumpstart, which is kind of a hybrid of 2 existing mechanics. So Jumpstart is the mechanic for the Izzet Guild, so blue and red. And what Jumpstart does is it's printed on instants and sorceries, and it reads, you may cast this spell from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, then exile this card. So this is Flashback meets Retrace.
So would be interesting to see how this plays with Madness. That seems like where it would be strongest, where you don't actually lose the card. You can also discard another Jumpstart card, so that's kind of nice. This ability is actually pretty exciting, not just from a Pauper level, but from a Magic level. Flashback is a very strong mechanic. There are definitely decks that want to put cards in graveyards a la Reanimator. And this is part of the cost, so it's just like I just get to put this in the graveyard for free, basically.
I could also see like a deck like Dimir Alchemy that mills itself taking advantage of some of these cards. Because if it's in blue-red, that's a deck that's already playing blue. If there's an effect that they already want, it does kind of mean that you get quote-unquote 2 cards out of your Forbidden Alchemies. So I could see it finding a home in somewhere like some deck like that.
And the actual blue-black mechanic, the Dimir mechanic, Surveil, plays very nicely into that type of deck as well. Surveil is, you look at the top, it's always Surveil number. You look at the top X cards of your library, then you put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest on top in any order. So it helps you filter out chaff in the late game or set up a flashback spell for later.
Yeah, so I really like this. I like the fact that it does let you look at the stuff. It doesn't just self-mill you. It lets you make a conscious decision. And while the stuff we've seen previewed with it so far kind of, in terms of pricing of spells, values it as a little bit more expensive than the equivalent Scry, it is neat. I do like the mechanic. And I do think that if you're a deck that already wants to put stuff in the graveyard, I think that this plays into that quite nicely. And actually the Golgari mechanic for this set kind of goes into this as well. Like this is weirdly a very graveyard centric set. So the Golgari mechanic Undergrowth it doesn't do anything on its own, but Undergrowth denotes that the card has an effect based off of the number of creatures in your graveyard. The first example we saw of this was actually is sadly not playable in our format, is a removal spell, Necrotic Wound, which is a black for an instant. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this is a mechanic that counts how many creatures in your graveyard and then does something equal to that number, as for what we've seen so far. I don't know if there's going to be ones that do double what's in your graveyard or what have you, but what are your thoughts on this mechanic?
My first thought is instantly Tortured Existence. The other example we have gives it like +X/+O in Menace. Maybe not. Maybe that one isn't the strongest one, but it does turn on some possibilities for a deck like that might be wanting to put creature cards into its graveyard anyway. Which is and Tortured Existence is a very like on theme Golgari deck.
Yeah, I think this, if we're gonna see one of these mechanics break out, I'm imagining Undergrowth has a high chance of being the one, just because there's already a deck for it. So, there's kind of always that thing that we've talked about when analyzing cards, where cards that go into that already have a deck prepped for them tend to do a little bit better, because a card can be powerful, but if it doesn't have a good home, it's just not going to start putting up results. So finally on this list, how about you take this, because you're the big Boros expert. What does Boros get out of this set?
Boros gets Mentor. Whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. So it's going to be strong in the aggro decks and limited. Not as exciting as any of the other mechanics, but I'd be very interested to see if there is one that is playable in Boros Monarch, specifically because that deck has a lot of really tiny creatures, and if you can get an extra, a 3/3 Glint Hawk or a 3/4 Core Skyfisher, you might be in a bit more of a game-winning state than usual. So I would be very interested to see if a Mentor card becomes playable in Pauper.
So out of curiosity, what are you looking for in a Mentor card for specifically that deck? Like, I'm guessing 3 power is gotta be a must-have.
3 power is a must, otherwise it won't ever trigger. 2 it'll sometimes occasionally, but I think 3 is really where you want to be. I like that Barging Sergeant has haste. The other card that's been spoiled, Hammer Dropper, costs 1 less, but doesn't have haste. So I think that being able to attack immediately and get immediate value off of that card is going to be really key. So I guess, and this just isn't going to be a common, right? But I guess my super ideal version would be a 3/2 with haste that costs 3, and that's just not going to be a card.
Ooh, yeah, that
you know what I mean?
That's asking a little much there.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I could see something like that coming in at like 4 or so,
or maybe a 3/1. I don't know.
It's tricky because obviously they want to create a nice balanced limited environment, and this is not kind of on its face. It seems like a very fair mechanic. So
that would be way too gas and limited. I know that card is unreasonable. I'm just thinking of like how good would this have to be to play it? I think it would have to be that good. So I guess I'm saying I guess it's not going to end up being that playable.
All right. Well, we will be doing a set review, I think, in 1 week's time, where we're going to be looking at all of the stuff, and we can look back and either laugh at how absolutely abysmally wrong we were or be vindicated. Who knows?
Exactly.
But I'm pretty excited about the set. I didn't expect to be as excited about Ravnica as I was when they actually started previewing stuff for it.
It's just such a... I think you said it best. Ravnica is Magic's home.
It's funny because for me, Ravnica is Magic's like second home, because I grew up with Dominaria, but Ravnica very much does feel like, somewhere that's comfortable, and it does get cool cards.
And like the sets have historically been pretty powerful, good sets. And I really like the lore behind Ravnica. Now that Wizards owns D&D also, I guess they don't wholesale rip this off, but it's very reminiscent of the Planescape setting from back when TSR still owned Dungeons and Dragons. It's my all-time favorite setting. The best computer game ever, Planescape Torment, takes place in Planescape. So I think Wizards probably cribbed a bunch of ideas from that, from the factions, and the idea of a whole plane as a city. Like there's some very strong correlations, that I really enjoy that aspect of it too. Even though I actually don't really like the lands too much, the basic lands.
Oh, that's a whole thing. I like for those who haven't seen it, there are lands themed to each of the guilds. I like them conceptually. They're not for me. Like I'm not a big enough fan of Ravnica to commit to playing those as like my forever basics. But
Yeah.
I like the initiative that they're taking with making these sort of specialty lands that are not just full arts, just because people, every single set are just like, I wish we had full arts back again. I wish we had full arts back again. And I like that they're trying something new.
I'm not even the biggest fan of full arts, to be honest. But yeah, I'm glad they're trying new stuff.
Yeah. All right. So Ravnica, great and all. So switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about a deck today that just cropped up, and I think I can honestly say is probably one of the best kind of new deck lists that we've talked about on the show. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah. Pretty impressed with the quality of work. This came from a Reddit post by Ironic Gentleman, and that player and Redder Tory, or I believe Red Tory perhaps, on the Discord, worked on what they call a Turbo Xerox deck, and they said they were pretty heavily inspired by Legacy Blue Black Death Shadow.
So you said Turbo Xerox. You want to explain for folks at home who might not be familiar with that term what this refers to?
Sure. The idea of Turbo Xerox is that you play a bunch of cantrips so that your deck always plays the same way every single time.
But Adrian, there's already a blue Delver deck that does that, and a blue-red Delver deck. What does this one do differently?
The beaters are bigger, I guess, is really it. But also, noticeably, they do not have any counter spells.
Well, they've no actual counter spell, but they do have some
they have no
counter magic.
Yeah. But really, they're just trying to power out a threat, a big threat like Gurmag Angler or Sultai Scavenger. If we want to start actually talking about the deck here, Mike. And they're looking to fuel their graveyard with all these cantrips, so like sort of doubling the impact of them. Stick a threat and then protect it as it coasts to victory. So I get, Turbo Xerox to me means that the deck has a ton of cantrips, that it's always able to consistently find the stuff it needs.
Yeah, and I do think one of the big strengths of this deck is how absurdly low its mana curve is.
Right, and
this is silly. Like, there's anything in this deck can be cast for 0 or 1 mana. And I think that's a great strength to have in a deck, just the fact that you can shave so many lands out of this thing. All right, so in terms of actual threats that this deck plays, there's a grand total of 10 win conditions. So we have 4 copies of Delver of Secrets, 4 copies of Gurmag Angler, and then 2 copies of the slightly more rarely seen Sultai Scavenger, which, for those who are a little bit less familiar with this, is a 5 and a black 3/3 flyer with Delve. So all the creatures in this deck can, in the abstract, be cast for a single mana. I really like this. I think that this is like a very solid chunk of creatures here.
Yeah, they're certainly effective. So, and I think that's one of the big strengths of the deck is that, like you said, they functionally can cost 1 mana. And in the write-up, a very well-written write-up on the Reddit, it goes into how you always basically want to be the beatdown because you're trying to win with one of these creatures.
Yeah, like you just want to turn these big threats sideways and lower your opponent's life total as quickly as possible. So getting into some of the spells here, this is let's break it down by like types of cards here. So in terms of draw spells, we have 4 Brainstorm, 4 Gitaxian Probe, a Mental Note, 2 Ponders, 4 Preordains, and 4 Thought Scours, and then 2 Gush. Holy crap. That is a lot of card draw.
So as we go through this, you'll see that there's really only 2 types. Well, technically 2 types. Well, 3. There's removal, there's counter magic, and then there's big spells. Gone are the clunky cards of Blue-Black Delver's past, which maybe was really what was holding down the deck to begin with. I wouldn't be surprised if this became a template for the Blue-Black Angler deck going forward, just because of how efficient it is, and that's really what the deck wanted. No soul manipulations, no that's what the card I was thinking of.
Agony Warp,
gone are the clunky cards. Instead, we have that many, however many you just said, cantrips.
A lot of cantrips. Like, let's not sugarcoat this. It's just a lot. That's
And
all you really need to know.
and to dip into the mana base a little bit, a little early, gone are the tap lands. We have 8 copies of eight islands, so Gush is a lot more viable all of a sudden, and I like that.
Yeah, we've got a lot of islands. We also have a lot of shuffle effects to take full advantage of those brainstorms, making sure that you're always getting, the quote-unquote full value out of them.
It's almost like the Is It Delver list in its splits of cards. And I think that's important. You really want the islands. You maybe have a couple of swamps. But why would you play with the Printing of Ash Barrens? Why would you play with the extremely clunky Ganglands? You don't need them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this does leverage the fact that in addition to all this mana coming in untapped for the most part, you are also running. So you're running two Gush, but that's not where the free spells that care about your lands end. We've also got, dipping into the other chunks of the deck, we've got 4 copies of Daze, and this is a very, very popular spell in Legacy particularly. So do you think 4 Daze is kind of, I don't know, because it makes up most of the deck's counter suite. Are you a big fan of this?
Well, Mike, I read the notes, and let me I have some opinions about Daze. I'm trying to marshal them. It is perhaps sometimes not ideal to have to daze with no threat in play. That's obviously the worst case scenario. However, the argument is made in this posting that it is okay with this deck because most everything costs 1 anyway. So either you're going to have to threat out, or you can easily rebuild your hand, or easily rebuild your board in such a way that it's not that detrimental to you. So I do like 4 copies of Daze in this deck, actually, just because I think that it'll catch people off guard a lot. I think it's a very important piece of early interaction. I think, most importantly, this deck can afford to do it because everything costs 1 mana. And I think that all of those sort of point into the favor of being able to run a spell like this.
Yeah, and also the fact that it is free. Like, it does make it so that you can play as though you're a tap out deck and then also still have counter magic up, albeit soft counter magic. But just take a quick moment here. How many times do you tap out in Pauper when you're playing like a non-control deck?
All the time.
Yeah, like the fact that Daze does on its face seem to be bad if your opponent's playing off curve. A lot of the times people are kind of curving out and tapping out on their turns to get the most value out of their mana. So I think that Daze is positioned pretty well right now in order to maximize the potential of, a force spike. And then completing the free cares about your lands things. We have 2 copies main deck of Snuff Out, which I am going to read because it's a bit of a reader. So it's 3 and a black for an instant. If you control a swamp, you may pay 4 life rather than paying its mana cost, and then you get to destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. So again, just kind of leaning into free interaction, despite the fact that this thing does hit you for 4. Do you like Snuff Out here? Because I'm a pretty big fan of this card in general.
I like Snuff Out here as well. Again, the fact that it's free is very key. So I like it quite a bit. In the Death Shadow deck, it obviously serves the dual function of being able to lower your life total, which that deck wants. But I do think that I like it in this deck as well.
Yeah, and then looking into some of the other stuff, we do also have, in terms of removal, we have 2 Disfigures, 2 Ghastly Demise. There's a Spell Pierce for additional counterspell interaction, and then there is 2 copies main deck of Divest, and I want to talk about this one. This is not Thoughtseize, but does it do a good enough impression?
You know what? I think the answer is yes. And it's because it helps you take away a creature preemptively that your removal might not be able to deal with. and it also lets you look at your opponent's hand. And I think the 4 copies of Probe, sure, they're free, but between the 4 copies of Probe and the 2 copies of Divest, I'm not surprised that this deck wants to see the opponent's hand a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it does also kind of let you know a little bit of what's coming. It does mean that you can capitalize on those dazes, knowing, like, does my opponent have interaction? Are they likely to try and, like, tap out for this thing? And I think that this is a deck that rewards format knowledge. Like, being able to look at your opponent's hand and go, I think I can get a daze on these following cards, and the other ones I'm going to have to figure out how else I'm going to deal with them. I do think that this is a deck that rewards a player knowing a lot about Pauper as a format in its entirety. That said, I'm still not 100% sold on Divest. I do think, like, sometimes you are going to whiff on it, but I think at this point we've gotten to a metagame where enough decks run creatures or artifacts or both. This is almost always going to hit something. All right, so looking through all these things, I'm seeing, if we're going to count Divest as a removal spell, I'm seeing 2, 4, 6, 10 is 2, 4, 6, 8 removal spells. Do you think that's enough for this deck?
Yeah, I think it's probably fine.
All right.
I think that it goes in the tournament report that Boros has a pretty bad matchup. I would agree. Their removal doesn't line up very well, nor do their counter spells versus cards like Battle Screech. So I think if the game goes long, Boros is definitely favored. And that's another point that they kind of make. We should definitely link to this Reddit post, by the way.
Yes, that'll definitely be in the show notes for this week. Now, I do want to talk about something. I think that, weirdly enough, for a somewhat controlling tempo deck, I think that this deck looks pretty good against elves. Like, weirdly enough.
It's got tons of removal. It's got tons of disruption. Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, I think Daze makes it so that, you know, if your opponent keeps a even remotely risky hand, you can punish it pretty hard. And the fact that you do have very cheap interaction that does interact favorably with most of the things Elves plays probably works out pretty well in the long run.
Yeah, well, I am reading the post. They consider it to be not a good matchup just because Elves is so fast. It doesn't give you a chance to deploy your threats and your removal.
I don't know. I could definitely see Elves running away with the game, but I feel like if you have a more disruptive opener, I feel like you could probably do enough to negatively affect their sort of very focused game plan that you might be able to pull that out. It feels less bad than, like, say, mono blue Delver against Elves, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, and then the lands, we kind of touched on this. This thing has shaved so many lands, and for once I'm not upset about it. It's running 16 total lands, so 2 Ash Barrens, 4 Terramorphics, 8 snow-covered islands, 2 snow-covered swamps. I hesitate to say that there's anything to add here. Like,
Evolving Wilds is strictly better, but yeah.
Evolving Wilds is strictly better because of the sweet F&M promo art. Is that what you're getting at?
Just the art's just better on almost all of them. It doesn't matter what Evolving Wilds you use. It's probably better than Terramorphic Expanse.
I'm not a big fan of the original, the OG, the Rise of the Eldrazi one, the big old floating rocks.
I think even that's better than Terramorphic Expanse.
Okay. We all got opinions.
I got opinions, Mike. I'll go with you all day.
Let's shift over to the sideboard, and then we kind of take a look at this deck as a whole. So we've got 2 copies of Dispel, countering instants, so being able to fight those counter wars effectively. 4 copies of Hydroblast, 1 copy of Spell Pierce in the board. Then we've got 3 copies of Augur of Bolus, you know, in case you need a couple more creatures. We've got 2 Diabolic Edicts, 1 Nausea, 1 Shrivel, and 1 Stormbound Geist. What do you think about this sideboard?
I actually kind of like the Augurs in the board. They're there for a little bit of a grindier matchup, I believe. I like the maximizing on counter magic, 2 more dispels, 4 Hydroblasts. I never understand the Nausea Shrivel split, but sure. And then I don't know. It seems very targeted, and I can see what you're going to bring in these cards for. So it seems very functional, like a very workhorsey type sideboard. Nothing flashy. Just I know what I'm going to bring my cards in against, and I know they're going to be good.
I mean, so not to split hairs here, but this is a deck inspired by a legacy deck, so the Nausea Shrivel thing makes sense. You don't want to get blown out by Lost Legacy. Oh, Cabal Therapy is a more likely one, isn't it?
Or Predict.
All right. Enough joking aside. I do like this sideboard.
No, I was being serious. You can keep going though.
I mean, Predict is. I guess Predict is a real card. I'm not gonna.
What do you don't play Legacy? Predict is played in Miracles like ubiquitously.
I know.
Oh.
It just always has felt like. I don't know.
This is another conversation. Sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up.
Yeah, we've gotten off on a tangent here. So I like the sideboard here that you can kind of side into the more Augurs of Bolas, and it's interesting that you said grindy matchups because I would personally be very ready to board this in against more aggressive decks where it just needed something to kind of stop smaller creatures from being able to get in the early game, and also particularly dig into removal spells if need be. But that's just how I would approach this. The Singleton Stormbound Geist, I get that it's in there for Delver. It doesn't honestly feel like enough to help that matchup, but I don't know. That might just be me. But stepping back to look at this deck as a whole. So you've recently come off a weekend of playing Legacy. This deck is based on a Legacy deck that was inspired by a modern deck in the form of blue-black Death Shadow. And I guess if you could kind of give people a little bit of background on that deck and what it's trying to do in Legacy, and then we can kind of talk about how those lessons could be applied to this list.
Sure. Let me just pull up a list real fast. I do not actually play the deck. So yeah, Death Shadow is... it's really kind of the same thing we've been talking about, where it wants to play big beaters, the titular Death Shadow, except Death Shadow gets -X, where X is your life total, and it is a B for 13. So you play a bunch of spells that help reduce your life total. But yeah, it plays Death Shadow, it plays Delver Secrets, it plays Gurmag Angler, it plays Street Wraith, just has a free draw effect. And then you have a ton of draws. You also have Brainstorms, but of course in Legacy you get the fetch lands. Ponders, Preordains. You have the same sort of package of removal, where you have like B removal, except in Legacy's case it's cards like Dismember or Fatal Push. You have the Hand Disruption. In Legacy it's of course Thoughtseize, not Divest. And then you have the counter magic in the form of Force of Will, but we have Daze. And this deck actually does play Daze. So your spell's quality is a little bit higher, and your threat quality, again, a little bit stronger. Because you can play Death Shadow. But I feel like we've sort of talked about this the same. This is... The decks are very similar in function, where they want to draw a bunch of cards, play their threats, and then remove the opponent's threats and counter what they can.
Yeah, I feel like the game plans here are very, very similar. Just the only real difference here is Death Shadow, both in Legacy and Modern, has always sought to take a bunch of damage very quickly, to the point where the Legacy deck runs Watery Graves. So shocks in Legacy, it's a thing now, I guess. But I think outside of that axis of attack, you're seeing a lot of similar effects where you're trying to stick a threat, just turn it sideways as frequently as possible until your opponent's at 0. And I think that this is kind of the list. How can I say this? This is the list that's going to be closest to its Legacy counterpart besides Elves, because it does just share a bunch of the stuff that makes that deck so good. It shares the hyper efficient cantrips. It shares 2 of the 3 big beaters in common, and like Sultai Scavenger's not too shabby either. I think that this is pretty, like, if the idea was to execute on a Legacy deck in Pauper, this does that pretty perfectly. Like
it's pretty close.
Yeah, like it's the same game plan. Stick a threat, keep bashing in with it, interact with your opponent on the smallest of margins possible, and hopefully you get there. And I think it does kind of highlight how good the blue cantrips are. This is something that we've talked about in the past, but if this deck didn't have, the Xerox cards or the air cards where you can just go through your library at a breakneck pace, I don't think that this deck would work quite as well, because compare this to something like blue-black alchemy. Which of these decks would you rather sleeve up, if you're being totally honest?
This one.
And why is that?
It just feels like it's doing more powerful stuff.
Huh. So you're telling me that the deck that's playing a bunch of legacy cards and a bunch of cards that have been banned in other formats might possibly be a little bit stronger than the deck that's hoping to get to 3 mana so that it can weird impulse itself.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
I mean, I'm kind of joking here. I'm being a little facetious in this, but I do think that at the end of the day, that's kind of what this comes down to. This is doing a similar thing, not the same thing. I shouldn't say the same thing, that decks like blue-black alchemy are trying to do. It's just doing it at such a higher velocity. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the card velocity related to specifically Faithless Looting. This deck does that so much better than Faithless Looting could ever hope to. I'm willing to bet, and I don't have the math here in front of me, but I'm willing to bet that the cantrips in this deck let you see every card in your deck before the game is over. Cumulatively. It's got to be real close to it. Now, I also do want to point out, this deck does also strike me as very similar to another meta deck right now. If you swap out a couple of pieces here, this has a lot of the same core components as Inside Out. Like the Tireless Tribe combo. It plays that same suite of just like hyper efficient ways to churn through your library.
I think I like this deck more.
And would you tell the listeners why that is?
It feels less easy to hate on. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I think I agree. Just the fact that people have started playing some weird sideboard cards to handle and hate out Tireless Tribe. Like, what is it? Burn is running Seal of Fire now. I've seen sideboard copies of Quicksand. Fume Spitter's stock has gone up considerably. So it's a little bit of a curious thing, right? This list has a lot of cards in common with that list, but instead of trying to one turn kill your opponent, this is seeking to play what is kind of a grindier game. It's not, winning on turn 2 ever. It's kind of taking its time and actually interacting with the opponent. And I think personally, as someone who is not a big fan of Inside Out combo, and that's just me, that's not a value judgment, that's not something out of that deck should be banned. It's just I don't like playing against it. This deck, on the other hand, feels like it is doing the most powerful things in Pauper, but it's not, just killing me out of nowhere. And it feels like, oh God, I'm not going to say this in a good way. It feels a little bit more like an honest deck, if you will, because I just don't have a better word to describe this. It feels like this is a deck that has to earn its win. Like, it doesn't just sometimes have the absolute nuts and win on turn 2. This is a deck that sits there and has to figure out how it's going to win.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Okay, so what lessons do you think can be taken away from this deck? Because this is very unlike blue-black Delver decks that play Delve threats of the past. What do you think this deck can teach us moving forward about how people can approach brewing for the format?
Don't be clunky. I feel like a lot of brews, they want to play like a marquee card, and it's just too clunky. This deck is it's not clunky at all, and that's what I like so much about it.
Yeah, like I'm looking through this list, and the only things I would ever think to do are I still have a quibble with divest, but I think I'm coming around to it the more I think about it. The only thing I could think to change here is possibly tweaking the combinations and amounts of cards here, because like Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain are the best cantrips in our format. Gataxian Probe is just free in this deck. Daze is the cheapest counterspell for the format. Snuff Out's the cheapest removal spell for the format. Gush is the cheapest divination for the format. Like, every part of this is just, I'm going to play the best card for this particular function. And I do really like that. And I do like the fact that this is a deck that manages to run 4 Brainstorms without maxing out its Ponders first. I do legitimately think that that's a really neat thing to see out of a deck, because Ponder is a better card for digging really quickly. And I don't know. I just like to see the fact that someone's finally kind of figured out how Brainstorm can work in Pauper, because we've said for so many, God, I hate to realize that it's been years now that that Brainstorm is not as good as the other blue cantrips in Pauper, and it's cool to see a deck that does, propose that Brainstorm can be just as good as these other cantrips.
Exactly.
Now, I guess, is there anything that you would consider changing about this? If you were to sleeve this up, are there any quick swaps that you'd want to make?
Well, obviously, I'd be playing Evolving Wilds, but
obviously, the
other than that, no. I was actually thinking of just sleeving up the 75 for F&M and seeing what happens.
I was honestly considering it as well, knowing that I have all this stuff and I've never gotten to sleeve up all 4 dazes for anything. So I'm kind of considering just jamming this the next time I get to play Pauper, because it is a really cool deck. That said, we haven't touched on it, and I know that we don't always get to this part. This is kind of a pricey deck. I know, obviously, it's cheaper than other formats. This is a steal compared to a lot of formats. This deck is $104 in paper, and it is $130 online. That said, if you run the non-snow covered lands, you save like $20 from either version. But I mean, is there anything in here that you're not going to get use out of anywhere else? I guess like Snuff Out doesn't always see the most play. But outside of that, is there anything in here that's really kind of only seeing play here?
I guess Thought Scour, but like the deck's expensive, I feel like, because of Moto, because of Days, and I guess the islands, but no, I think you would get use out of this, and I think $100 is expensive for the format, but is very reasonable for a Magic deck.
And I was gonna say, like, even if you buy into the islands, like, this is not that far away from
you don't need snow-covered islands at all, actually. You're right.
Well, I was going to say that I think that the snow-covered islands at this point, I have come around to the fact that that is a bluff, right? Because if your opponent goes snow-covered island, Preordain as their turn 1, what deck are they playing?
Yeah, I'm going to think it's Delver. You're right.
See, here's the thing. It could be Delver. It could be blue-red Delver. It could be this Delver. Or it could be Inside Out. I've seen Inside Out playing snow-covered lands because that turn 1 snow-covered land into Preordain can make your... I think at this point it's an actual consideration, because it does mask what you're playing until you stick something that betrays that you aren't blue-red Delver.
Yeah.
So I do actually really like that, because if you can get your opponent to play around like Spellstutter Sprite, sure, like that's free value for you. And I don't think they're absolutely necessary, but because like, Island into Preordain is still like something that mono blue Delver does, so I don't think you're losing that many percentage points here. But if you have the money for it, and it does also let you port into a blue-red Delver deck if that's something else that strikes your fancy. But yep. Yeah, and as far as paper, like most of the expensive stuff here, I didn't know that Snuff Out was like apparently $250 now.
It's because of Death Shadow, yeah.
Yeah, but I saw foils had spiked, but I didn't know that the actual regular versions were that expensive. But yeah, like Delver Secrets is a little on the pricey side in paper. Gitaxian Probe's still a little bit pricey. Your Ponders Preordains are obviously expensive, but those go into any blue deck. I think from the economic side of things, like if this is the type of deck that appeals to you, if you've played one of these Death Shadow decks in Legacy, I mean, I guess that might not be the best case. Like, if you play Legacy, I can firmly recommend this $100 deck to you. But if you've played decks similar to this and enjoyed them, I think that this is a pretty solid slam dunk for you. I can't imagine any of this being, worthless tomorrow. That said, though, boy, a playset a day is really $60 online.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Wow.
You got to pay the troll toll.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, yeah, looking at it now, the online list, Days, Snuff Out, the snow-covered islands, and Hydroblast accounts for like 90, like that accounts for $115 out of this $129 deck. That is absurd. All right, but I guess the only other thing I can think of is seeing this deck being successful. Is there space to utilize this cantrip package in a different way? Because we've seen Blue-Red Delver, now we've seen Blue-Black Delver, we've seen Tireless Tribe, and all of these things kind of have the common refrain of cantrips are very good, and a little bit of counter magic can protect your threats till they get in there. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but do you think that there's anything else that can be done with kind of this suite of spells? Any other payload that you could think of?
You could play that hexproof guy instead. I don't know. Everything just feels so well tuned.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a greatest hits of Magic's common cantrips and good common interaction. Like, again, it's very hard to argue against this deck because these are just all stars. So I would definitely say try it out if you have the cards or you want to get into Pauper. I would actually say that this is a great entry point. It might not be the simplest deck, but if you've been thinking about getting into Pauper and you're familiar with Magic, I think that this deck is a great option because it is very high impact. Its game plan, while not overly simplistic, is not, you're not a 5-part combo here. You're just playing a threat, protecting your threat, and trying to disrupt your opponent's threats. And that's the long and short of it. So yeah, I definitely say if this is the type of deck that interests you, check it out. And if not, be on the lookout because I can imagine that this deck is going to start putting up results. Anything else you have on this Turbo Xerox Delver Angler deck?
It's good.
It is good.
Are you playing it?
You want to take us out of the show for the night? You got anything else for us?
Nope, but thanks everyone for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you with the support of our patrons. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, if you listen to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS, Pat's Games, and Mike's LGS, JP Comics. And of course, you can find our theme song, Quantitative, and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. And I almost forgot to thank our patron this week, MRH Blue. Thank you. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.